Great. Well, thank you for joining us for the third installment of our monthly series, Using Your Degree, which introduces our undergraduate students of the School of Theology and Religious Studies to the many different ways that they can use their degrees upon graduation. Last month, we welcomed our own Dr. Robert Miller and Catherine Schweers, who discussed higher education, pursuing graduate education, and what career possibilities exist after receiving your master's or PhD. Tonight, we explore law and diocesan ministry and all the various shapes and forms it can take. What's the difference between canon and civil law? What is a diocesan chancellor and what do they do? We'll answer these questions and more this evening. Our presenters will speak for about 15 minutes each about their experience and their careers before we engage in question and answer. And so as they're talking, if you have any questions, please just go ahead and put them in the chat and we will get to them when we get to our Q&A. And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Susan Timoney to introduce our presenters for this evening.
Hey everyone, it's nice to have you here. And it's a real pleasure for me to introduce these two women, both of whom are friends. Dr. Locey was a student in the Doctorate in Ministry program here at Catholic University. Dr. Jannuzzi and I met when we were studying in Rome together. She was my maid of honor. I was her matron of honor at our weddings, so happily continue to be friends. But even more importantly, I'm really excited that it's these two tonight because they're women of a deep and abiding faith and love for the church, and with just a tremendous experience to share with us. So first, a little bit about Dr. Locey. Dr. Locey is a parish and diocesan ministry leader, as well as a worldwide consultant. She has served in a variety of staff positions in central offices in 3 different dioceses, including chancellor or chief operating officer of a diocese, spanning a massive 20-county area. She's a co-leader of a stewardship department of leadership training for planning and research and the officer and superintendent of Catholic schools. She has worked for 24 years as a on the staff of mega parishes as a chief operating officer, chief financial officer, and as a pastoral associate. Internationally, she worked with the bishops of Australia in developing a stewardship for life program. As I said, she is a graduate of the Doctorate in Ministry program at Catholic University. She holds an MA in Pastoral Ministry from Gonzaga University, a master's in Public Administration specializing in non-for-profit management from the University of Washington in Seattle, which is a professional designation in fundraising. Also from Indiana University School of Philanthropy, and a BA from the honors program at Loyola University of Chicago. Dr. Locey is married and lives in Central Florida.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to do both together and then we'll start. Yeah. So Dr. Jannuzzi is a native of Southern California. She attended the University of San Francisco, studied in the St. Ignatius Institute, which is their Great Books program. She obtained a bachelor's degree in philosophy in 1990. She moved to Rome in 1991 and earned a baccalaureate in sacred theology from the University of St. Thomas Aquinas. And in 1994, a license in canon law from the Pontifical Gregorian University. In 1996, she returned to the United States and worked as a canon lawyer for the Diocese of Reno and for a law firm in Reno, Nevada. She then came to Washington to study at the Catholic University of America, where she did her Juris Doctorate in 2001. After completing a judicial clerkship, she joined the Woodburn and Wedge law firm in Reno, where she has become a shareholder since 2010. Since 2002, she's represented the Diocese of Reno, Bishop Montague High School, and Catholic Charities of Northern Nevada, as well as many other nonprofits and religious organizations. She's a member of the National Diocesan Attorney Association. She earned a Master's of Law degree in estate planning from John Marshall Law School in Chicago in 2020. And very interestingly, she's married to her husband, Larry Jannuzzi, who has for 30 years served the Archdiocese of San Francisco as a diocesan attorney. So they split their time between San Francisco and Reno. And for some of you who are Chesterton fans, she's a member of the Chesterton Society. And she was the past president of the Nevada Chesterton Society. So it's my delight to welcome them to join us for this conversation tonight. So Dr. Locey.
Okay, So I was asked to talk about my progression in my various roles. And my dream to work at the diocesan setting began when I was in 9th grade. I was I was in the Archdiocese of Chicago, where in the 80s, there was a lot of the things in the church that was happening there. Theology on Tap was born there. Bishop Barron was just a young priest. In fact, Cardinal-elect Wilton Gregory was at my high school serving as an auxiliary there. So it was just, everything was happening. And they had this dynamic office of evangelization. And I remember in 9th grade going to my parish priest and telling him that one day my dream was to be working for the office of evangelization. And so, the parish priest said, go for it, and he helped me find ministry in the parish that could do the same thing. So I could get a little taste of what evangelization might mean. About my junior year, he told me that if I was really serious about wanting to work in ministry, I needed to find a rich man and marry him, because there was no way I was going to be supported by the church financially, at least in the Archdiocese of Chicago. Little disappointed by that. And I said, all right, well, then I'm going to be the best volunteer I can be. And in the meantime, I still had that yearning to serve the people of God. So I found a degree that would best serve. And I thought the government is where you can serve the people of God. So I went and got a bachelor's in political science, and then went on to get to enroll in a public administration master's program in the University of Washington in Seattle. Halfway through it, I took a little trip to Europe for like a month, and I was in Florence for the Feast of the Assumption, and I had an epiphany. In my estimation, at 21 years of age, I thought Italy was a real poor place, and Florence was really poorer of the poor, and they really needed tourism. And yet it was the Feast of the Assumption, and everything was shut down. The museums, the restaurants, even the street carts, nothing was alive. And this was a Wednesday. So I started thinking, I'm like, well, they must really trust in God that their economy can recover from this. And that got me thinking, what if I put my trust in God and trusted him to supply my personal economy? And at that moment, I decided I was going to work for the church and just trust that I'll survive it, without a rich man. So I came back, and my graduate school then announced, literally days after I got back, that they had decided to start a nonprofit track, and that as second years, we could take it, which I thought, again, was another thing that God telling me, all right, you trust in me, I'm going to provide for you. In addition, the Archdiocese of Seattle was having a parish leadership program where you could go get certified in administration. So I took that simultaneously so that I could have the benefit of both the church and management. I also had to get an internship, a paid internship. So when I was looking for a paid internship, I went to the pastoral center, and I asked I had an interview with the superintendent of schools and told her I needed a part-time internship that's paid. And so she gave me one in management services. And that was basically dealing with everything: schools, principals, finance, parish finance councils, teacher in-service training, Catholic school recruitment, Catholic school development, data collection. And I was able to then learn kind of what the diocesan role was with parishes and school management. After I received my degree, and again, I had another newly ordained priest was taking me from a meeting one day, and he told me, oh, you're looking for a parish. I got my degree, and I wanted to be a parish administrator, a parish business administrator. And he said, oh, there's no way you can get a job right off of, from graduating onto that level. You know, you need to be a youth minister, just do that. And I said, well, I can understand that. Youth ministry is fine. I'm just not, I don't have any theology. I don't have any education degree. How could I relate to kids if I don't have that training? Anyway, that priest later became a bishop and also best friend of one of the guys who hired me later on in life. So he knew that I actually got a job right off the bat as a parish administrator. And I got hired at the parish that it was the largest parish in income. It was a working parish that basically Boeing was their primary employer. It makes all the 737s and 757s. And I learned a lot from that. And one of the main things I learned is that all the challenges that I was going through, learning the job, learning how to be an administrator, God provided. He gave me that as like a trial run for my next position. And that's exactly what happened. Is then I had the director of parish stewardship and development for the diocese would use me as a guinea pig. He would have all these ideas. He would give me the stuff to do. I would try it in my parish. So my parish would reap the rewards. And then he was able to sell it to other parishes, like try this, try that. Because that's oftentimes what parish diocesan people do, is they give ideas to parishes. He then got asked to serve in a diocese in New York and launch stewardship for their 134 parishes. And he asked me to come with him and be his co-leader for that. And I agreed to do that for 16 months because I really liked parish work. And again, everything that he taught me on stewardship, I was able to implement. What I learned there was trying to sell things to parishes is really hard. In fact, my parish, some of the pastors even did, is that I would give presentations and they would give me they would invite all parishioners who ever complained about money to my talk so that I can convince them why their parish should do stewardship. So I kind of had to learn how to handle complaints, how to have things thrown at you and duck, but also that whole idea of research and development of parish ministry. And that's one of the things that I see the role of the diocese does, is there a research and development arm of the church that can really come up with new programs for parishes to work on, because parishes, there's so much going on that you just don't have any time. I stayed actually 24 months, but at that point I decided I really wanted to get back to parish life. And I went back to Seattle and then was hired at what was now the largest parish in income and size. And I spent 6 years there. And there I actually supervised everything, not only administration and facilities, but I oversaw youth ministry, faith formation. We had staff for all of this, but I oversaw the staff, pastoral care and outreach, and eventually actually even the principal. My pastor wanted to give me the role of being a pastoral associate, which is more of a generalist, and with that, the chief of staff position. But you needed in our diocese a master's degree in ministry or religious ed or theology. So what was really nice is he says, I'll support you. And he did. And he said, as long as I get to pick out the school. And so together, I found a school, which was a joint program between Gonzaga University and the University, which is Jesuit, and the University of Portland, which is the Congregation of Holy Cross, which is run by the same people as Notre Dame. And I took that course, or got that master's level. And what I did during that time was, since I was already in a parish, every class that I took that information and I implemented it right in the parish. So if we were working on a problem, that's what I worked on in class, and it really helped. And the parish got immediate benefit for that. after 6 years, my husband, who's really not liking being in the second cloudiest city in America, so we moved to Florida, and it was kind of neat because just as I started looking, the development director in Orlando approached me and said, "We have a parish that needs a position just like mine. Can you give me your job description? And we're going to design an identical job for that." I'm like, "Oh, that's great. Here's my job description." And then I applied. Now there were about 125 people who applied, I was told. So it was competitive, but they did say that based on my experience and my education, I rose to the top. Now, this parish was about the 5th largest parish in the diocese, and it had a K-8 school, an early learning center for infant through pre-K4, an adult daycare center, a thrift store. It had $22 million worth of facilities, and its budget was about $11 million. It had 150 employees. Unfortunately, it was in massive debt. In fact, the operating budget for 5 years in a row were 6 figures debt, and it was just piling on. And I was told that I had 3 years to fix it. We stopped the bleeding within six weeks, and then within 2 years we had eliminated all the debt. And that was through focusing on mission. So we didn't focus on our problem, we focused on the church's mission, but then applied good management skills to that. By the time I left, 14 and a half years later, we had $14 million in the bank. Now you might think, oh, that's a lot. Well, not really. If you think about, that's about a year's worth of the operating budget plus anything to do with capital. During my last about 5 years, my dear pastor could tell that I was getting restless. And so he said, well, why don't, he knew that one of my strengths was studying things. So he encouraged me to go to Catholic U and get a Doctor of Ministry degree. And I did, and I did the same thing. I took every class that I had, I tried to apply it to the parish. And so that the parish, again, really benefited from what I learned, and I could actually test what I was learning. When I applied at Catholic U, they asked me a question, what I would do with this degree. And I said, I wanted to be either a parish life director in a priestless parish or a COO of a diocese. And so what happened was that about 14 years after that, or after about a year and a half after I finished my degree, a position for COO, chancellor of a diocese, came open in California. And so I applied for it, and I'm very grateful that I was able to do that. Now, a chancellor job is different in every diocese, and it depends on what the bishop is looking for. One of the things that some dioceses, a chancellor might just be an archivist and a notary, in which it basically says, yes, this is the bishop's signature, this is what the bishop is doing, and just keeps all the records. A second type of chancellor is one that's primarily about canonical affairs. They often have a canon law degree, and they are the bishop's canon lawyer. They deal with anything that might come up that has to do with the Vatican, with priest affairs, deacon affairs, and anything canonical. And then the third one is a COO of a diocese, and that's what I took. That's what I held. I was in charge of the pastoral center and the pastoral, as well as the whole diocese. So as in being in charge of pastoral services, the departments that reported directly to me was the tribunal, human resources for the whole diocese, Catholic charities, Catholic schools, faith formation, youth and young adults ministry, diocesan archives, communication, which included not only social media, but the diocesan magazine, which we didn't have a newspaper, we had a magazine. And we even had a radio program, and that fell under me. I was also responsible for all safe environment, the safe environment training, the pastoral care for any victims, as well as the independent review board. I sat on the priest, I was a staff resource for the priest personnel. Oh, no, not priest personnel, Presbyteral Council, which is the priest's council. I also served on the diocese as a resource for the Diocesan Pastoral Council, the Independent Review Board, the Vocations Committee, Admissions Board. I also served on the Mission Integration Committee, which actually was something rather new for us, dealing with everything with homosexuality and how do we respond to issues with that in ministry. Anyway, it was my job was to, I also sat on the bishop's core management team, and then his clergy cabinet, which met every week, and we dealt with basically all the priest issues. And I was basically not only the only woman, but also the only lay person on that cabinet. So those were the things that I experienced as chancellor. If you asked me how do you get a job, and I've sat on hiring committees as well as I've hired people. And the one thing I look for is I hear about people saying, I've always wanted to work for the church, but I look at their resume and they have nothing other than maybe they were a parishioner. And I always look, if you are going to work for the church, volunteer. That tells me that you are serious about working. And guess what? It is the easiest thing to find a volunteer position in the church. Other fields, it's really hard to get involved in there, but believe me, pick anything, whether it's a parish, a religious order, soup kitchen, anything, that really helps. Now, because you're studying theology, you would already have a bump up of all the resumes that I would see, because the resumes that I would get had no theology, and they'd be asking to get the religious ed director job. So you already have a wonderful step up there, but just make sure that you get involved with campus ministry, anything, and continue doing that. It will show that there is your talk, you're walking the talk. So that's what I like to share. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jannuzzi to share about her career, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I think I too sort of started thinking about certainly a lot about my faith. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, when I was in high school, but I was certainly keenly interested in my faith and chose to go to a Catholic high school and took a very great interest in my religion classes. And preparing to go to college, it was important to me to go to a Catholic college, and I chose a university kind of based on the thought that I would study theology there. And I ended up, when I arrived, I changed majors and instead got a degree in philosophy, but I did study a lot of theology, and I took intensive biblical Greek and as well as completing a great books program at the University of San Francisco. And for me, it was just sort of one step at a time. I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought maybe I would want to be a professor. I just knew I wanted to know more about my faith. I wanted to serve the church. And I met I had a professor in my junior year. I went to Oxford University as part of a study abroad program, and I had a Dominican priest there for my Greek tutorial, who had taught in Rome at the Angelicum, and he encouraged me to consider going to the Angelicum. And so I did. I finished up my philosophy degree at USF and packed my bags and went to Rome, and I had really no idea what was going to happen when I got there. And that's, of course, where I met Dr. Timoney at the Angelicum, and studied theology there, got the baccalaureate degree. At that point in time, I thought I would specialize in patristics, and I thought probably I'd become a professor. And in the course of my classwork in the baccalaureate program, we had to take some classes in canon law. And at the same time, I also became acquainted with a couple of housemates of ours who were studying canon law over at the Gregorian University, which was the Jesuit university. And the combination of the classes and my acquaintance with some folks that were studying canon law really piqued my interest in canon law. And I really loved the idea that you could take this code of canon law and you could learn what the rules were, and then you could apply that to some real life situation and try to figure out what, you know, how did you apply the law to the facts to come out with a, you know, a decision about, you know, whatever the case might be. And so I shifted my focus, and instead of specializing in patristics, I went to the Jesuit school, to the Gregorian, and completed my license in canon law, and thought at that point that I would go straight through and get the doctorate, and figured that at that point I would either have the option to become a professor or to work in a tribunal. And however, I was getting very tired of school and needed a break. And so I wrote and sent resumes out to several dioceses. I'm originally from Southern California, so I sent resumes out throughout California, Arizona, and Nevada. And that merited me one job offer in Reno, Nevada. And I thought, well, okay, I'll take the job in Reno, Nevada and see what happens. And so I worked at the tribunal in Reno for a year. And the work that I did was interesting for sure. It was about 90%, 95% maybe marriage nullity cases. But I did also get to do some other stuff. I got to work on a petition by our bishop for a dispensation from the obligation of clerical celibacy for a man who had been ordained a priest, had left the priesthood. I think he'd already been dispensed from, you know, from being a priest, but he still had the obligation of celibacy. And so we had to do this special petition to the Vatican. And so the bishop, the diocesan bishop, has to submit what's called a votum. And so I drafted his votum. It was about 7 pages long, and I really enjoyed that. And I also got the opportunity to write some memos about some different canonical issues. And I even got to do some translations from Latin into English. Occasionally they bring things to me for that. And during this time frame, actually one of the very first things that happened when I worked at the tribunal was that there was a clergy education day. And I think the idea was people who were newly, who had been newly named as pastors at parishes were supposed to come to the pastoral center and participate in this day-long or morning-long educational process. And so, excuse me, one of the people that came to speak at this clergy education day was the guy that was the attorney for the diocese. So he was a shareholder at Woodburn and Wedge law firm, and he came over and gave a presentation about whatever legal, you know, secular legal issues that affected the parishes. And when I was introduced to him, the first thing he said to me was, "Oh, I've read the Code of Canon Law and I don't get it." And I laughed at his little joke. And but I began to think about that, and I thought, that's not really so great. Here's this guy, he's represented the Diocese of Reno, as it turned out, since 1974. And he, is a very capable attorney and knew the diocese very well. But he really didn't understand canon law. He didn't really appreciate it, I guess. And so I started thinking about that. And I will, on the subject of money, because Dr. Locey mentioned it, as a canon lawyer, I was making $20,000 a year, which was $300 a year too much for qualifying for HUD housing. And basically I had to go with the roommates wanted ads because I couldn't afford an apartment. And that all worked out very, very well for me. God provided at every step in the way, but I certainly wasn't making very much money. And I was also a little bit antsy about working almost exclusively on marriage nullity cases. It kind of depressed me, to be honest. So while I liked the work as a canon lawyer, it just felt like it was a little bit of a drag to just be doing marriage nullity cases. And so I started thinking about going to law school, and I had actually thought about that when I was at the Gregorian, but I had dismissed the thought because I thought, this is ridiculous. Here you are, you're already on your third college degree and you cannot possibly go and get a fourth college degree. Well, I mean, I thought I was going to get the doctorate, but I thought, I can't do that. So, but as a canon lawyer, I was beginning to think, instead of getting that doctorate at the Gregorian, maybe I could go get a Juris Doctorate at an American law school, and maybe I could become a diocesan attorney. And so I lost my job kind of unexpectedly, and I thought, okay, well, this is an opportunity to go get a job at a law firm. So I did. I landed a job as a paralegal at a law firm, and I started studying for the LSAT. And before I went off to law school, I went and talked with that same diocesan attorney at Woodburn and Wedge. And he was very nice to me and very kind. And he talked to me about what his job entailed. And he gave me some suggestions for what I ought to study in law school. I mean, just certain classes. He said there were tax issues and there were, what else? I don't remember. First Amendment, and he had a few suggestions about the sorts of issues that come up for a diocesan attorney. Schools, I think, was one of them. And so I got accepted to Catholic University of America, which offered me a very nice scholarship because they saw what my background was. And of course, I put in my application, I'm interested in serving the church. And I really enjoyed my time at Catholic University and got a first-rate education at the law school. And part of my reason for going to Washington, D.C. was I thought, okay, here I'm going to be at the confluence of these, the Archdiocese of Washington, the Archdiocese of Baltimore, the Diocese of Arlington, the military archdiocese. There's all these Catholic schools there. There's all these Catholic religious orders. I thought for sure I'll find something in the DC area, and I probably could have, I suppose. I did do an internship at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. I worked at their Office of General Counsel one summer, and that was a fantastic experience. But ultimately, when it came down to it, I just kind of began to think, I really miss the mountains. There's no mountains when I look out. There's nothing on the horizon here, and just like all these like little things. As much as I loved Washington D.C., I just thought, I'm a Westerner. I really need to go back west. And so I ended up getting a clerkship in Reno. Actually, I worked in Reno every summer, but I got a judicial clerkship in Reno. And that was a great experience. And when I was about midway through that 1-year position, I went and talked with my boss, a judge, about what do I do next. And so he ended up recommending that, well, I don't know if he recommended, but we talked about different possibilities. And I mentioned that I had spoken with this diocesan attorney before I had gone off to law school. And so he called Mr. Quapple up, and basically I got an invitation to come down to Woodburn and Wedge and do a job interview. He said they were in the process of hiring right now, get over here. And so I did, and he, Buzz Quapple, basically said to me, look, if you'll come and work at Woodburn and Wedge, I will train you to take over my client, the diocese, because I want to retire. And I said, perfect, I'm there. So completely an act of providence, as were many other steps along the way. And so I took the job at Woodburn, and true to his word, Mr. Quapple worked with me very closely, and we had all kinds of adventures. We worked together for about 2.5 years. And, one of the first things that happened was we had a lawsuit that involved some contractor, actually a subcontractor that had done some work at a parish, and he claimed he hadn't gotten paid, and he had done a bunch of extra work that he didn't get paid for. So we defended that lawsuit. We had some lady had died and left a portion of her estate to her parish, and her daughter wasn't very happy with that. And so the daughter tried to bring a trust contest and claim her mother didn't know what she was doing. And so we had a little trial when I was like 6 months into my career. We had this trust contest, and one of the first things I had to work on was our bishop at the time was interested in creating parish corporations for each of our parishes, because at that point in time we had sort of all of our eggs in one corporate basket. So there was one corporation that owned everything in northern Nevada. And he wanted to see about creating some little corporations, one corporation for each of the parishes, and could we sort of give the parish assets to the parish to hold in its corporation. And as a canon lawyer, that was of great interest to me, because under canon law, each parish is its own corporation, and it's called a juridic person. And so I loved the idea, because that would make the canonical structure more like the civil structure would be more like the canonical structure if we did it that way. And Mr. Quapple didn't like that at all, because he hadn't understood the code of canon law when he read it. And so he and I didn't agree about everything, but that was what the bishop wanted to do. And so that was one of the big projects that I worked on. And he introduced me to this group that he belonged to. It's called the National Diocesan Attorneys Association, and it is coordinated by the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops. So this is like the same guys that I interned for, but they're just across the street from you at Catholic U. And so they're the ones that are in charge of it. There's a group of about maybe 6 or 7 lawyers over there. And so of course they were delighted when I surfaced in Reno as being the diocesan attorney, because they had known me when I was an intern at their office. And we get together 3 times a year. We have a national meeting once a year, and then we have a local meeting 2 times a year in addition to the national meeting. And, just as sort of frosting on the cake, I guess, in 2003 or 2004, we're not really sure which, I met this nice man who did part of the work for the Archdiocese of San Francisco. And over the years, we got to know each other at these meetings. And in 2012, it sort of started going up to a different level. And by late, say August of 2012, I was calling up my friend Susan Timoney and telling her I had met the man I was going to marry. And so we got married in 2013, and we have been traveling back and forth because neither one of us wanted to give up on our job. So both of us represent our diocese. My husband has been in-house counsel with the Archdiocese for a number of years, and I still work at Woodburn Wedge. I do other things as well. The Diocese of Reno is kind of small, and it does not keep me busy full time, but it does provide me with a steady stream of work, and I get to work with the bishop and with the chancellor and with the chief financial officer and the stewardship and development department. And I represent all of the schools. So we have a high school and we have 4 parochial schools, and I get phone calls from the high school and from the parochial schools quite a lot, and it's like all over the board. They can be, you know, well, we had the student disciplinary issue, or we have a teacher that did X, Y, and Z, and you know, now we've got a problem, and it's employment law, it's human resources, contracts, leases, buying and selling property, you know, corporations issues, lawsuits, whatever happens, you know, anytime they get sued. Usually I'm the person that defends the lawsuit, or at least I find somebody to defend the lawsuit, depending what it is. We have, you know, we have actually a fairly modest share of sexual abuse lawsuits, but we also have, you know, just like all kinds of garden variety things. You know, there's slip and falls, we've had car accidents, we've had wrongful termination type lawsuits or whatever. And sometimes they just call me up, they want, you know, just advice about how to handle this or that situation. And so I find myself doing a fair amount of shooting from the hip, you know, and sometimes they'll call me and say, well, what do I do about this? And I'll say, you know what, let me think about it and get back to you. And, you know, I'll think about it, and maybe I'll go and talk to my husband or to one of my partners or something like that, and kind of like think it through, and then call them back and tell them what the answer is, or tell them what I think the answer is. And then there's not always one right answer. But I find the work to be very rewarding, and at times it's very difficult. I remember I worked for many, many years with the stewardship and development guy. And when he was going to get his job for the diocese, he went out to lunch with a nun who told him, this is going to be a great job, but there's going to be a lot of challenges, and it will really test your faith. And I think that's very true. You are going to find that not everybody working for the Catholic Church is a saint. And indeed, some of the people that work for the Catholic Church, you know, are literally belong behind bars. And, you know, so, I mean, it's not always rosy. It's not always easy. But certainly a strong faith and a liberal dose of humility, I think goes a long way to, you know, to keeping your sanity when you do church work. As a diocesan attorney and just, you know, as a partner at a law firm, I certainly make an awful lot more money than I did as a canon lawyer. And that's fine. That's, you know, it's a grace from God, but I certainly give them a discounted rate on the work that I do. So I suppose I could make more if I didn't represent the church, but at the same time, they give me a really steady flow of business. And regardless of the money, I really, really enjoy it. And I think, you know, it's very, very rewarding. And it's certainly, you know, it's not where I thought I was going when I started all this, but I think God has, you know, shown me each step along the way what the next step was. And so I think just to build on what Dr. Locey said, if that's what you really want to do, that's what where your heart is leading you, trust God, and he will make it work out.
Amen. Well, thank you both. We have just about 15 minutes for questions. So if you're here with us in the moment, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat. And while we wait for those, Dr. Locey, you talked a lot about your experience as a parish administrator. Is that the same as I think we hear about parish life coordinators now, at least in the last few years, in that, you know, a layperson runs the administrative aspects of a parish, and the priest, kind of handles more of the pastoral. But even if not, can you just speak to the value of having a lay person like yourself who went through the education and the training and the personal work to be really deeply engaged in those administrative processes for our parishes?
Okay, so yeah, a parish life director is often one that is appointed by the bishop. And back when I started, there was no official titles yet, because everything was always run by priests. So my first job, I was called parish administrator, which I know canonically I'm not, because I'm not a priest. But it would be comparable to being a parish business administrator, but because of my background of both ministry and with management, it's a little different, because I can supervise actually ministry people, which like in Seattle, if you were a pastoral, what they call the pastoral assistant for administration, you only needed a bachelor's in business or the equivalent, and you didn't, you only supervised the bookkeeper and that. As being like in my position as a pastoral associate for administration, that was more of you were working alongside the priest. I was trying to make it so that the pastor could actually be the shepherd and the visionary, and then I would be working to take that vision that he and the pastoral council developed and implement it in all the different departments. So you were basically, you were doing all the operations. So did I answer your fully, or what did I leave out?
I just think that if you could maybe say a little bit more about the value of having someone like you, right, in that role, as opposed to a pastor who's sometimes asked to do the business side that maybe they don't have that experience in, on top of the pastoral.
That's exactly right. And that's what Pope Francis has been asking for, is that the laity, that the church uses the laity and to learn, take what they know and they have studied and to implement it for the good of the church. In the Bishop's Pastoral Letter on Stewardship, it talks about how important it is to use a good business practices for the building up of the church. It allows the pastor to totally be able to work on the relationships with the parishioners and not having to get into the nitty gritty of things. So, you know, like we had to train our people, you don't go to the pastor for everything. You know? And we practice something called subsidiarity, which is you go to the person. So if you have a religious ed issue, you know, you're not going to the pastor for that. You're going to the DRE, who could make decisions on that fine. So that's one of the things. It really does free up the pastor when you have it. In Seattle, we found out you had to have a parish in order for it to be effective. A parish had to be about 1,200 people to support an administrator like mine. That was like their gauge. So oftentimes that's one of the things that they did, is they would merge parishes so that they could get to that level where lay people can use their things. And the other thing is, I'm gonna quote my treatise. in Gaudium Spes, it says that that the bishop said that we needed to use the secular sciences. You know, we needed to use psychology, sociology, management, communication, education, and you need to use all those tools in order to bring people to a deeper level of faith. I mean, they said also use theology, but it's all right to use these other elements in our secular world, and that's what, when used for good, it could really cause the parishes and the church to grow, and people deeper grow deeper in their faith with God and others.
Thank you. Dr. Jannuzzi, I know we have a couple students, as Dr. Timoney said earlier, who are interested in law, some of them in just civil law, some of them in just canon law, some of them in both. Can you talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between them? And I mean, this can be kind of as broad as the critical thinking skills needed for both of them, to just kind of whatever sticks out to you from your career.
I think that the critical analysis skills are really pretty similar. And so I felt like having a degree in canon law and having practiced as a canon lawyer was a huge leg up in going to law school. And one of the things that had intrigued me about law school was precisely that as I was studying canon law, I would sometimes think to myself at the Gregorian University, that's very interesting. I wonder how I wonder how civil law would deal with this or that issue. And so I do think that the skills are similar, but they are different law systems in a couple of different ways. First, the canon law system is a Roman law system. So it is more, I'm going to say code-based, although canon law was not actually codified until 1917. But the distinction between the Roman law system and the common law system that is prevalent in England and in countries that were Anglophone countries, so countries that were founded by people that came from England. The common law system often relies on case law. So there may be a code, there may be statutes, but then there's a body of case law that's ever growing bigger and bigger that fills in the gaps and interprets in an authoritative way the law of the land. And that is not the case with canon law. So with canon law, the Roman law system, there's no body of case law that's authoritative. What's authoritative is the code of canon law. And there may be erudite commentators on the code, and there may be some cases out there where you can draw something from them, but they aren't definitive. Another difference is that in the common law system, a case is developed by an adversarial process whereby attorneys for parties who are adverse to one another go out and they gather evidence and they present petitions and arguments and so forth before a judge who decides the case. In the canon law system, it is, at least in theory, the judge who goes out and gathers the proofs and does the interviews and so forth. And the role of the advocate is really limited to arguing the evidence that was gathered by the judge. Now, in reality, tribunals don't always work that way, but that is the way that the code foresees that they are to work. So the canon law system, it deals obviously with a lot of religious issues. So there's a section in the code that's devoted to religious life. There's sections in the code devoted to the structure of the parish, or the structure of the diocese, the authority of the diocesan bishop, the authority of a parish priest. There's an entire section that's just devoted to the celebration of the sacraments and what are the rules and regulations regarding that. There's a section that regards penalties, and of course those penalties really just have to do with canonical crimes. So that could be something like breaking the seal of confession, or soliciting a crime in the course of a confession, or desecrating the Eucharist, or things like that. And then there's an entire section of the code that deals with processes, like how do you initiate a process in the tribunal, say a process regarding the nullity of marriage, or a process regarding a priest who wants to be dispensed from his vows, or religious that wants to be dispensed from vows, or whatever other dispute there might be. So anyway, it's very interesting stuff, but it's very much sort of internal to the church. and doesn't necessarily have a reference outside the church. But I think it's, the way I like to think of it is something like each corporation in the United States is governed by the law, the federal laws and the state laws, but then the corporation has its own internal bylaws. So it's got its own articles of incorporation and its own bylaws. And so there's a lot of flexibility when you're setting up a corporation. You can determine, you know, what are the internal rules that govern that corporation. And I think canon law, to some degree, operates like that. It's kind of like those internal bylaws of a corporation. So both legal systems apply to the church, and you have to try your best to make them, to the degree you have any control over it, you want to make it match. You want the result to come out the same under both legal systems.
Great, thank you, Dr. Timoney.
So I have a question for both of you, because I was struck that though you had different paths of combining work and graduate study, you did it in a number of really interesting ways. And so particularly if you think about a lifelong commitment to the church, it generally requires at least a master's degree, particularly if you would like to move into senior level positions and you would like to increase your ability to earn some money, and then on to a doctorate of some sort. And so I'd like if each of you could just talk a little bit about the advantage of having worked for some time and then went back to school to continue studying, or making sure you were matching your studies with an internship. How was that an advantage for you?
Okay. So my first degree, I was not employed in the church initially. So it was really tough. And again, I was in government, so I was studying government. So I had to kind of make things up and I was like trying to figure out how would it really work. Now it helped because when I went, that's one of the reasons why they wanted you to do an internship. Of course, my internship became with the Catholic Church, and actually I sat in on some of my classes. I had to take a labor law class, and I was the only, at the time, there was about 9 of us in it. It was actually a doctoral level class, and I was with a whole bunch of superintendents from the public school systems, and I was the only woman in it, and I was the only private school person, so I became the expert. And so I had to kind of work my way up. But again, it was hard to place it. I waited 10 years before I went and got my second master's degree, and it was night and day. You know, not only had technology changed, you know, but it was also like, okay, we're talking about a subject and I could immediately apply it, which was neat because I saw some of my other fellow students who didn't have work in the church and they really struggled. So it just makes it so much deeper. And you could get so much more out of it if you did take some time at least to have some background so that you could have a point of reference.
I agree. I think that knowing how the church works in practice helps an awful lot to understand, you know, what are these rules that I'm reading about in the Code of Canon Law or whatnot. And it also, I think for me, it was also very helpful just to get to know people. So it was a huge leg up that I had worked at the USCCB for one summer because I met all those guys that worked there. And I did some research projects for them and so forth, research projects that I still come back to, you know, today and you know, remember some of the lessons that I learned and whatnot. But to work as an outsider, to do the representation for the Diocese of Reno, having worked for the diocese in the first place and having the canon law was very helpful because I know what it's like from the inside.
Thank you both so much, not only for that answer, but for being with us this evening. And thank you to those who have joined us for our conversation tonight on law and on the various paths of diocesan ministry, how these things intersect. And as the final using your degree of our fall semester, we hope that this conversation has helped to open your eyes to the pursuit of civil and canon law, as well as diocesan work I mean, stewardship and all the other ministries and in all of their other capacities. As I stated earlier, this conversation will be made available on the School of Theology and Religious Studies YouTube channel under the playlist Undergraduate Formation Events. We hope that you'll continue to join us for future events starting next semester. Thank you for joining us and have a great night.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.